Live and direct, live and a date no jive.
Legalize it.
I mean, how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Koala Podcast. And I've got on this week's show, or on this show, I should say, not this week's show. And I'm going to, Maya, I'm going to say your surname wrong, and you're going to correct me. Dukmasova?
Maya Dukmasova.
Damaska, okay. And she works for Injustice Watch and is also a freelance journalist. And I read an article about a week ago now, I think, about 10 days ago, that she'd written all about a testing lab in Chicago who have been very naughty, and they're getting a lot of giving a lot of falses on THC readings for DUIs. Now, anybody who listens to the show regularly, reads the site, or just is generally interested in cannabis knows that this is a major issue all around the world, and nobody has yet solved it. But that doesn't mean you have to make up porky pies, as we say in England, and get people in trouble when they're not. So Maya wrote a long and detailed article about it, and I'm going to ask her to sort of say how she came to the piece, what interested her, and then what this company had been doing, why they said they'd been doing it, and whether we have any outcome at the end yet. Maya, thanks a lot. Sorry for the intro, but I'd just like to give people a little bit of background. In the quick preamble when we spoke, you said that you met the lawyer who was working on the case. So how did a case come to court? What was the story behind that?
So thank you for having me on. First of all, I'm so happy to hear you're interested in the article. So I was contacted about a year ago by an attorney who had clients who were charged with DUI-cannabis and had test results from this lab at the University of Illinois,
multiple
Chicago.
clients, not just one.
Yeah, this particular attorney specializes in DUI defense here in Illinois. And so he had a lot of clients, most DUIs are alcohol related, but he was seeing this lab and had gotten to understand a little bit about the problems happening in its operations.
And was this lab just testing for cannabis, or was it testing across the range for what we can term illegal drugs?
Yeah, so this was a forensic toxicology lab, and they did testing for both for alcohol and other drugs besides cannabis. So they did testing on blood for alcohol and drugs, and then they also did this urine-based testing, which is some of the kind of core issues in the article are about their approach to testing urine in DUI cannabis investigations that really was not was not based on proper science.
So let's just quickly go through the process in Illinois. Somebody gets pulled up for DUI, they have to do a breath test. Do they then, if they are perceived to be driving under the influence of something, are they then taken directly and tested with a blood and or urine test? What's the process in Illinois?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in general, there's like two ways of being guilty of DUI. You can be charged with DUI based on visible impairment. So, you get pulled over, you're not coherent, you can't walk a line, you can't pass these field sobriety tests that officers administer. So in that situation, it doesn't really matter like what you blow in terms of your blood alcohol content. It doesn't matter what your toxicological analysis shows. Like if you are determined to be impaired just based on how you're behaving at the scene, you can be charged with DUI. However, if you're not showing signs of impairment, or if you pass the field sobriety test, then you can be charged with DUI based on your toxicological analysis. So breathalyzers themselves, which are administered curbside, are not admissible in court. You have to, for alcohol.
So that's breathalyzers for alcohol and other compound substances or just other
Uh,
compound substances?
no, for alcohol. And as far as I know, there's no breathalyzers for other substances. There's definitely not a breathalyzer for cannabis.
Okay,
So,
because I mean, look,
so
I'm just going to jump in because in Australia and various other countries, the technology we all know doesn't really work, but various police forces, and this is why I'm really interested in your article, because various police forces around the world are driven to a purchase decision on technology that the people who are selling them that technology don't even really know how if it works efficiently. So I'm just interested where we are in Illinois in terms of this process.
yeah, so there's no breath test for cannabis and for other drugs as far as I'm aware of. Definitely there's not any for cannabis. So and for alcohol, when there is a curbside breath test with a breathalyzer, like that can only be used as like a probable cause to arrest you, but in order to go to court, that you need toxicological analysis of the blood. So the blood has to be drawn again for alcohol, within a certain amount of time, for other drugs as well. And for drugs for which there's like a zero tolerance, so, various other intoxicating compounds, urine tests can show metabolites of drugs. Sometimes, depending on the drug, they can show, I guess, active components of the drug as well. And before the decriminalization of marijuana in Illinois and the subsequent or conjoined amendment of the DUI law, it used to be that any amount of any traces of marijuana in your system based on urine, based on blood, could be a reason for you to be convicted of DUI. So in 2016, we have this major thing happening in Illinois with the decriminalization of marijuana. So possession of small amounts of marijuana were decriminalized. And together with that, the state legislature amended the DUI law to say that to create a legal limit for THC, the active compound of cannabis that is the gets people high. So the law was amended to specify that you had to be over the legal limit if you're not showing signs of impairment.
And do we know how they decided what that legal limit was and who they went to get that research to make a decision?
Yeah, so the legal limit in Illinois was set to 5 nanograms of THC per milliliter of blood, or 10 nanograms for other bodily substances, which was not defined. The only basis for that was the fact that other states that had previously legalized in the United States had gone with that limit. The first state was Colorado. There was really no scientific basis to conclude that 5 nanograms of THC in your blood
means anything at all. Yeah.
Exactly. Cannabis, even more than alcohol, cannabis really affects different people differently. The amount of THC in your system can be different depending on how heavy of a user you are. So there really wasn't any scientific basis for this legal limit, but it was something that law enforcement groups were able to stomach. And so once they did that in Colorado, other states that enacted legal limits went and did what Colorado did. So that's how we got our legal limit here in Illinois. The kind of complicating factor here is the fact that the state
one of
legislature,
10,000 complicating factors, isn't it?
So the state legislature created this, said 5 nanograms for blood and 10 nanograms for other bodily substances. What those substances were was not defined. And there was some conversation in the kind of predominant crime lab system in our state, which is run by the Illinois State Police. After the law was changed, it was like, what are we going to do? What does this mean? And the conclusion of the Illinois State Police was that, well, this means that we have to test blood. We can't do any other kind of testing because we don't have active compounds of THC in urine. So we're going to go with blood. This lab that I wrote about, which was a small forensic toxicology lab inside the University of Illinois, Chicago, the scientists there decided, oh, the statute doesn't say we can't use urine. We're going to use urine. And in order to be able to quantify how much THC there is in urine, you have to do some complex chemistry because THC actually doesn't show up in urine. When we consume marijuana, our body metabolizes it. The liver actually changes the THC molecules that are circulating in our blood. And in order to flush them out with the urine, that the THC is changed from its active compound, the drug, into these different metabolites. So in order to be able to write a lab report and report to the police, this is how much THC this person had in their urine, you need to actually perform some sophisticated chemistry and convert the metabolites back into the drug, and then count that. And then you can say, we found whatever, 15 nanograms of THC in this person's urine. And so this lab was practicing this kind of urine analysis for DUI investigations for many years. And they were basically the
can
only...
I just ask a couple of quick questions about the lab?
Mm-hmm.
Was this lab the only lab in Illinois outside the police labs doing this? Or were there other labs testing for THC, but they were using blood? Sorry, it was just.
Yeah. So this was the only lab, as far as anyone knows, like in the world, that was offering Illinois law enforcement.
So there's a lot of men and a lot of egos in there, yeah?
Yeah, so they were the only lab offering Illinois law enforcement the service of THC quantification based on urine. So in Illinois, law enforcement agencies either use the state police, which did not do urine. There's one other smaller government crime lab that also did not do urine testing. And then Illinois law enforcement sometimes sends the work out to labs outside of the state that do analysis for them. There's like a lab in Philadelphia. Yeah, there's like a major commercial forensics lab in Philadelphia that does it. There's another one in St. Louis, but those labs also did not offer the service of quantifying THC in urine for Illinois law enforcement. The UIC lab was really the only one that was doing this kind of service.
Do we know why they decided to do that and how they persuaded their bosses at the university and then the police that this is the way we're going to do it, this is the way we're going to generate revenue? Because it's all about revenue generation for the university, obviously. Is that why they snuck under without anybody realizing for a while?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question, because even though they were housed inside the university, nobody, as far as we were able to find, nobody at the university even knew what was going on at this lab. So the lab was something called a self-supporting unit, which is like a thing, like some kind of business unit inside the university. Yeah. And there's tons and tons of them, because the University of Illinois system, the University of Illinois Chicago is one of several University of Illinois campuses. It's a major state university, and there's tons and tons of self-sustaining units. And the rules for these self-sustaining units is that they basically operate like a business within the university, except for they're not supposed to make a profit or run on a deficit. So they're supposed to break even to cover their own operations. And they're supposed to kind of support the educational, or public service missions of the university. So even though the lab was housed inside the UIC College of Pharmacy, Biopharmaceutical Sciences Department, no one that was academically part of the bureaucracy above this lab was in charge of
whoever was in charge just hired a bunch of people from outside, and they just got on, put their heads down and started making money.
Yeah. So the lab director, and the thing is that they really never even made very much money, because the lab had two sides to it. The lab had existed since 2004 to do equine forensic testing. Mm-hmm. So they were testing racehorses mostly for the Illinois Racing Board, just to make sure that
they're not shoved full of
horses that win races. Yeah, exactly, are not drugged. So the vast majority of the income of this lab came from this racehorse testing. And then in 2015, they hired this toxicologist to kind of build out their human testing section, because the horse racing industry in the state was kind of undergoing a decline. Two of the racetracks had closed. So they were kind of looking to pivot, and they thought this would be a good business opportunity. But ultimately, they really didn't make that much money off of this. But nobody at the university knew what was happening with the science, even though they were monitoring the lab's finances. And the law enforcement, to get to the second half of your question, the law enforcement agencies that were working with this lab, they loved working with them, because collecting urine is way easier and more straightforward than collecting blood. You can bring a person back to the police station, have them pee in a cup and send off your sample. Whereas the blood has to be collected by certified phlebotomists, like the cops can't do it themselves. And so from speaking to law enforcement agencies, and especially people, from the department that was sort of their biggest client, this was like a great convenience for the cops. And the cops had no idea that the science,
wasn't. Yeah. So, I mean, do we know how many samples approximately were taken? And then we come to the lawyer, how many people were being found guilty of driving under impairment? Do we have ideas of percentages, numbers?
So the only number we know for sure is that the lab issued about 2,200 reports where they had analyzed people's body fluid samples for.
Well, that's not a small amount, is it? It's not a small amount.
No. So, and this goes back to 2016. So between 2016 and 2024, about 2,200 reports. Most of them are reports that are like individual reports for an individual person.
Yeah.
Sometimes they've been like supplementary or amended reports. So we can't say it was like 2,200 unique individuals, but more than 2,000 for sure. And we don't know anything about how many people were, in how many of those reports where they did the testing for the cannabinoids, did they find the cannabinoids, and in what quantities, and how many of those people were convicted. All of that remains opaque because the university is in control of this information. They have all these lab reports, and they are persistently fighting tooth and nail to prevent these reports from being released to the public. So our organization is now, we're suing the University of Illinois Chicago to get these lab reports because they denied.
That's what you have to do. You have to sue them. You can't get them under any sort of FOI.
Well, I did file the FOI and they denied it for a bunch of different incoherent reasons.
Yeah,
and so now we're taking them to court. Yeah. Because we feel like these are improper denials. So yeah, it remains to be seen. I mean, I found dozens of examples of people who were convicted based on this lab's testing. And the urine testing is just like one part of the issue. There's also the issue of their results in blood tests being potentially compromised, because in 2021 they actually discovered that their liquid chromatography mass spectroscopy machines, which are kind of the standard tool to analyze liquid samples, were not properly set up to be able to differentiate between delta 9 THC, which is what is illegal in the state of Illinois and what's in the DUI statute, and delta 8 THC, which is not illegal and was not mentioned anywhere in the law. So they found out that they couldn't tell the difference between the two isomers in 2021, and they didn't do anything to fix their method, reported to anybody, nothing. The Illinois State Police around the same time also found they had the same problem and issued like a big letter to all their clients, issued more than 1,000 amended lab reports where they like indicated that there may be something, these results may not be accurate. So this lab did not do any of that and continued testing for 3 more years until the lab was closed down. There was an investigation and it was discovered that, there's this issue. They ran the test again, and yes, indeed, they cannot see the difference between delta 8 and delta 9 THC.
So essentially the lab is gone. So the onus for responsibility lies on the university. So they basically just shut all their doors, locked everything, and said, try and come and get us. How many of the people that went through the court system ended up with a fine? Did anybody end up being incarcerated? I mean, do we have those numbers and figures?
Again, we don't have like anything in like numbers to quantify the extent of the problem, but I mean, in Illinois, like there's like 20,000 or more DUI arrests every year.
Yeah. And
the vast majority of those cases are stemming from alcohol. Most DUIs are misdemeanors unless you have like multiple prior DUIs, or you cause a fatal car crash or a car crash in which somebody is like really severely hurt, or there's a child that's hurt. You're not going to be charged with a felony in a DUI case. So, but there are, like, anytime that there's a fatal car crash, people's body fluid samples are taken as a matter of course. Like, there has to be a toxicological analysis done whenever there's a fatal car crash. And so while I think it's safe to say that most people who ended up being convicted with the help of or based solely on the slabs testing were probably convicted of misdemeanors. I did find people who had felony convictions on their background and who are incarcerated now, where these lab results played a role in getting them convicted.
Not 3 strikes
or
and
getting
you're out, but part of the process of, your
yeah,
parole.
or enhancing their sentences, basically.
Yeah. You've obviously done more work than I would spend time on this, and you've had discussions with lots of people. Do you think that Illinois basically is reflected in most other states in the US with this issue?
I think, well, a lot of states, there's still no legalized cannabis in the more than half of US states. And a lot of states that have legalized, they don't have the same legal limit issue. Like, some states have essentially, like, it's just about impairment and like signs of impairment. Other states, it's that your toxicological results only come into play if there are signs of impairment. So it's like a kind of a conjoined, like, if this, then this type of thing. So Illinois is definitely in the minority of states that have like prescribed legal limits for THC in your body as of today.
Have you spoken to any of his clients directly to understand their experience and the process that they went through in order for this to happen to them?
Yeah. I mean, and there were multiple defense attorneys who had clients who were impacted by the lab, and I did multiple interviews with people who were directly impacted by this. And some people were never convicted because they had lawyers who kind of understood the science and were able to fight the lab results. And, either there were not guilty verdicts on the DUI charges, or they got thrown out because the lawyers did a good job showing that, like, this lab is not reliable, or the way that this toxicologist testified in court was misleading. But even in those scenarios, like, it's definitely had like a huge impact on people's lives. Like, first of all, the people that I spoke to, by and large, were people who were involved in like fatal car accidents. And I mean, some of them admitted that they caused the accident. Like, maybe they fell asleep at the wheel after staying up all night with taking one of the guys was like up all night taking care of his sick dogs, and then was on his way early to work and fell asleep and blew a stop sign. It's it's a very common thing to happen. You come to and you realize that you caused the fatal car accident and people are dead, and then you're charged with aggravated DUI based on what this toxicology labs is saying, when that you did not smoke marijuana. The last time you smoked marijuana was 27 hours ago, before the accident. Yeah. So, it's I found it kind of a very tragic situation, because while like being wrongfully convicted on misdemeanor charges is also very impactful in people's lives, and even being wrongfully accused, like being indicted on these charges, like, you have to go through this very arduous and long process and pay a lot of money, and it's
always the people who are towards the bottom end of society and have less money, less knowledge, and probably can't afford the lawyers who can understand the system better than the people with a bit more money. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, but then on the other end of the scale, like the people who kind of face the most severe consequences as a result of these cases, like there's also a huge tragedy in like the fact that this person, like, you've been involved in the serious car accident that you caused. You may be coming out of it physically maimed for the rest of your life. You've got this hanging over your head that you are like, you killed 2 people, whatever, in this car crash. And on top of that, you're dealing with like being wrongfully accused of something. So it's a huge snowball of trauma, I think, for the folks on the, at any place in that.
And writing
scale.
About this, what do you think the process for for trying to discover solutions are. Obviously, look, you're going to sue the university to actually try and get some hard facts out of them. But in the end, it's really about educating policymakers and legislators to try and create something that actually works for people.
Yeah, I mean, beyond the university coming clean essentially about who's impacted, and
you're going to be waiting a while for that, aren't you?
Right. And I mean, I don't really have a lot of hope that like the university would do the right thing and like contact people whose body fluids were tested to let them know that this happened. Beyond that, there are like the state law, there have been proposals, there have been bills introduced to change the state law to make it very clear that you cannot use urine for DUI cannabis investigations. That would be like a very small tweak in the law. Like,
has that even been discussed? I mean, that's bizarre. You would have thought by this stage that might even be, somebody might have just, set that question in the lower house, and even if it's ignored, at least it's there on the whatever the Illinois equivalent of Hansard's is.
Yeah, so shockingly, I mean, a bill has been introduced, but the legislator that introduced it, there were no co-sponsors on the bill. There were no committee discussions about it. She didn't want to talk to me about it when I was like, hey, let's talk about this bill.
She didn't want to talk to you about it.
No, which makes me think that like it wasn't really something that she was that serious about pushing for, because typically when you contact the legislator about like, hey, talk to me about this bill you introduced, it's like they love the publicity for it.
I know. Well, I mean, so you can't get them off, can you? So, I mean, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds like somebody else was pushing her to do or say something.
Yeah, and it perhaps, it was like some issue that came up through her constituents that she wanted to look like she was like caring about the issue and then like not really meaning to. But aside from that, I think, to me, this whole story was actually like also a story about the dire lack of forensic science oversight in our country. And Illinois is not unusual in the total absence of like independent oversight over our crime labs. We have this Forensic Science Commission that was created a couple of years ago that is housed inside the Illinois State Police and chaired by the head of the Illinois State Police, who is the same person who runs most of the state's crime labs. So they're not empowered to investigate complaints. They're not empowered to discipline anybody, to issue any kind of legally binding findings. They're really just an advisory body that's largely populated by people connected to the Illinois State Police or somehow law enforcement, basically. So another kind of thing that could change is that we could reform our forensic science oversight body, because to me, this whole thing is like, okay, this is like a little lab inside this university. This is like this scandal that happens at this really small institution. It's this really small lab that's really not a big player in the forensic science space in the state, in a discipline of forensic science that's not really usually beset by scandals. Like forensic toxicology is not like bite mark analysis. If there's going to be a problem, when there's a problem that'll come up in our Illinois State Police crime labs, which historically there's been many lab scandals at the state police, we have like a fox watching the henhouse type situation, because it's the state police that runs the forensic science oversight body.
It's also a world where science is inventing new compounds that humans shove down their throats, and in the US everybody gets in a car, so the problem actually just compounds and compounds. And a lot, I always say with cannabis, it's a really good way of explaining lots of other problems that